So I guess it's nearly, it is 9:10, so we can get started. So thanks a lot for coming. Like, there's 7 people in the room, which is 7 more than I expected on the last day recording. By the way. Yeah, we already started. Yeah. So so 7 more than I expected on the last day, 9 o'clock class. It's so I once went to a conference when there was a panel at 8 o'clock on the last day of the conference, and I was the only person apart from the panelists. So yeah, so we are doing great, really. But let's get back to the stuff. So we have this. We finished yesterday on this group. Joint intention shared agency paradigm, and I told you how it should work in the broadest sense that institutional beliefs arise when people act together, and acting together is this technical term, meaning that there are this group of people who have special intentions, and those are intentions, speaking broadest terms, to act as members of a group, and those intentions to act as members of group are accompanied by beliefs that other members of the group share the intention of the particular person to act as a group. So only if you have those shared agencies, so this joint intentional actions, then you can say that the group acts intentionally or has a relevant belief. But so I wonder whether you have any thoughts about relative strengths and weaknesses of this theory. This is like a serious theory. The previous ones were just something people thought a while ago, but no one really believes it. And this is popular, so I guess there are some people in legal theory using Bratman's account to explain like legislative intentions and so on and so forth. So this is like a serious contender. So do you have any thoughts whether this could work or not? Yeah, Ira.
So I guess back when I was a graduate, this was sort of the hot new thing.
Yeah.
It strikes me that there's a lot of machinery involved in individuals' intentions that the members of the group need to have. And so for certain sorts of kind of non-formal groups, maybe the account works better.
Yeah.
But it's always struck me as a little bit of an easy fit for collective explanation of collective intentions for groups that are more formal in character. Yeah. Because the formal rules do some of the work.
Yeah. In
constructing the group intentions, but if you read Bratman or Gilbert or something, none of it seems terribly concerned with intent with institutions.
Right. That's
and so there's a sort of there's at minimum a little bit of a gap, but at worst the theory is sort of not really directed at the kind of legal institutional stuff.
Yeah, that's a fair point. That's I guess that. Like the standard way of looking. Is that what you ask?
Well, nothing specific, I guess.
Okay, yeah. So let's go to the recap. So there is this pros and cons. So the main advantage, this account seems to capture the unique character of joint action. So there is something more than just sum of individual beliefs, but there's something more. And this is a reductive account, but this reduction is not trivial. So this is good. This is what what we should like in philosophy. That we should like accounts which are which give us explanations of those attributions of beliefs, but in a reductive way. But this reduction is just not brutal, not trivial. So there is some subtlety involved. In this, so these are the main pros, which So and the main disadvantage is precisely what you said. So most people seem to think nowadays that this might be fine, but it is fine for like informal groups that acts in a spontaneous way. So if we all decide to cancel the class, and as the class we go and say, yeah, let's cancel the class, and then we can have this joint intention to cancel the class, and then we will act in this Gilbert's or Bratzmann's way. But most institutions do not seem to act in this way. So so there's those examples of disaffected Supreme Court member who really hates it. And he has no real intention to do whatever, but he has no other way of earning money for his family, so he still signs the papers and so on, but without being really committed, and he doesn't really want to do this and thinks democracy is a scam or anything, but he still signs the papers, so it's valid act on his part, but he doesn't have the sort of Brassmanian intention. So yeah, and the other important disadvantage of this theory and of any theory that offers a reduction of the institutional belief to the beliefs of its member, even the non-trivial reductions, is called the discursive dilemma argument. And this is like standard thing, and all the papers nowadays in the literature have this sort of table. So sorry, I had to have this table because the table is obligatory. So this is the simplest table I could come up with. So if you read List and Pettit, they have complex tables with nice examples and so on. But let's say we have a 3-person group deciding whether to accept P and Q, and they do it by voting. So they can do 2 things. They can either do voting on each P, Q, and P and Q, but they can also only vote on PQ, and then the results come out. So, and those procedures yield different results. So let's say that person 1 believes that P is true, but Q is false. The other person, the second person, believes that P is false, but Q is true. And the third person believes that both are true. So in order to be consistent, person 1 needs to believe that P and Q is false because one of the contracts is false. The second person also needs to believe that P and Q is true because they believe that both contracts are true. But what should the group believe? Should the group believe, accept that P and Q is false? This is a majority opinion, after all. But if they go for the procedure in which they first decide P by voting, and they vote by simple majoritarian account, so P comes out as true, then Q, they vote on Q, and it comes out as true because it's 2-1 again. So what should they believe about P and Q as a group? And the anti-reductionist argument goes by saying they should believe as a group that P and Q is true because they, as a group, decided that both P is true and that Q is true. And List, for example, and Pettit provide a couple of examples of court cases when it was important. So first the courts voted on accepting a general statute, then there was a vote on a minor premise of the decision, and it came also as true. So the court was somehow forced to rule in favor, even though each individual member would rather vote against. So yeah, so this is something that might happen in real life. So this discursive dilemma is usually used to disprove any sort of a reduction of attribution of belief to groups. It says, now, even if you have a subtle way of reducing, this subtle way of reducing would not work because of discursive dilemma. You cannot just reduce it. So in this case, if the court or some other body really decides to say P and Q is true, because they are somehow forced to do this, it would not be the case that they have a joint belief that P and Q, because most of them don't believe that P and Q. So this is sort of a stuck counterexample to this any sort of joint intention, shared agency account of institutional belief. So this is the easiest way. You can reiterate it, you can make it more interesting. So conditional statements are very much interesting from the point of view of lawyers. Perhaps that, you know, the conditional beliefs of courts are somehow have very different truth conditions that conditional beliefs of members of the court and so on and so forth. So there are like lots of those examples which should, according to people who use this example, should lead us to reject any sort of reductive account of group belief, group intention. So
isn't that a version of Condorcet paradox?
Yeah, it is. It is more or less. It is a version of Condorcet paradox. Yeah. So, but it's meant to be so, sort of speak, made applicable to the specific case. But yeah, this is not really new.
But another question I have is that what's the nature of such collective beliefs? But not rather beliefs that something is true or false, but rather that something is good or bad or preferable, better.
Not necessarily so. This might be also like if you have some sort of proceedings in which you need to first establish the facts, you know, to make this like in criminal court cases in Poland. So the court is required by the law to first establish the fact and only after to make the decision. So it could arise also if this is establishing the fact procedure. So the problem is general. It doesn't need to apply only to preferences. So in this sense, it's not Condorcet dilemma straightforwardly. So because it doesn't only apply to preferences. Okay. Yeah.
I have a question. What do you think about the reductive solution of this Condorcet dilemma proposed by Ludwig?
I will talk about Ludwig in like 20 minutes.
Okay.
Yeah. So there is a way around it, and Ludwig has a way around it in a reductive way. So we'll go back to it. So okay. So
just to clarify, when you say this is sort of argument against reductive accounts,
yeah.
So you're saying that it's in favor of joint intention accounts?
No, because joint attention. It's okay. In technical sense, in which I'm using reduction here, joint attention is reductive.
Okay.
It's not only my sense. So Licht would say it's reductive account, and other people would also say that it's reductive account.
Okay.
So for our purposes here, and I think like most general metaphysicians would accept this way of framing the debate, the joint intention account is a reductive one in a metaphysical sense of reduction, because you say that there is some set of basic facts and joint intention account reduce group belief to those more basic facts about joint intentions. So I know that people like Gilbert say that her account is not reductive, but I think we should take it with a pinch of salt. It's just metaphorical way of using non-reduction by her. So yeah, so no, because reduction in metaphysics have a very specific sense. So you say that there is some sort of metaphysical determination of one fact by the other, and then you're a reductionist. So she is a reductionist in the sense used by general metaphysicians. So she doesn't, you know, uses this word in a loose sense, I guess. Yeah.
Because I think that Petit and Liszt
Yeah.
sort of use this in order to argue for their account equations.
Which is non-reductionist in this technical sense. So
Okay.
I'm now moving to Liszt
Okay.
Petit. Now, yeah. So this discursive dilemma is the primary drive for people whose number is exponentially growing. You you know, like 10 years ago, there was like 3 people on the market who believed realism. But in like last 3 years, I got like 20 papers, 2 books by several people, not of all that are listed here, who genuinely are realists about group beliefs. And Tollefsen was probably the first in the last decades. Deborah Tollefsen was the first person. Then came Licht and Petit, who wrote this major book, which gave the realists standing, because they're very good philosophers, and they came and said, yeah, we are realists. But now it's like loads of people using it, and they are expanding this realist claim. So Jasper Kerstrup wrote a paper in CTs saying that he believes in group knowledge, not only group belief, but also group knowledge. KM Hess, I don't know what's her full name, she goes by KM Hess in literature. She wrote a paper about group free will, expanding on this realist account. So this is like, and I haven't yet read the book because it's just been published by Jennifer Lucky, who wrote a book about group lies, that group can intentionally lie, and so on and so forth. So yeah, there is lots more and more people subscribing to realism, which like 20 years ago would be like non-starter, but now it's really strong and popular position among philosophers. So what is the point of realism? So realists take attributions of beliefs to institution to be literal truths, not reducible to any more basic truths about joint intentional shared against it. They say that institutions are genuine believers and that they're genuine agents capable of genuine intentional actions, and those actions of institution are based on genuine institutional reasons. So they believe that when we say that Google believes that open source is good, it's just about Google being a real agent, having a literally having a belief that open source is good. So there is no metaphysical reduction of those facts to any more basic facts. And yeah, it was extremely unpopular, and most people would dismiss it offhand like 20 years ago and say, no, no, that's just not true. But now it's established, and there are like reasons for this, you know. Sorry, yeah.
I would like to ask about the Margaret Gilbert account.
Yeah.
Because I'm thinking about Gilbert account like realistic, because there are also some plural subject which is constituted by some.
Okay, so yeah,
so on and so on.
So that's what I was saying before. So in my view, Gilbert is not a realist in the sense, because she thinks that joint action is unique and special, but she doesn't think it's metaphysically primitive. Okay, she thinks it sort of arises from intentions of individuals, which are special and unique, but I haven't seen her being committed to this sort of claim that Licht makes or Tollefsen makes, that there is a group agent sui generis thing that has its own beliefs irreducible to. So maybe I haven't read all of her papers, but her classic papers are not putting forward this sort of realistic claim.
But I think that in Gilbert accounts, there are 2 spheres. There's normative sphere and factual sphere, I think. And when people who have factual, ordinary, individual intention hold some plural subject, there emerge some kind of normativity.
Yeah, sure.
So I'm not sure. I know that there's a lot of problem of interpretation of this account, but in my opinion, if there are 2 spheres, it's hard to say that this is really reductive or something.
Okay, but I'm not talking here about social normativity. And so she's not reductionist. She's non-reductive. Reductionist about social normativity. But this is not the scope of realism. The scope of realism is institutional belief. This can be purely factual beliefs. Most of them are apparently according to realists. And Gilbert has not, in my view, I might be not read something. It happens a lot of time that you read like 10 classic papers by a philosopher, and there's this 11 obscure one when they put forward some more claims and you don't miss it. And it's, oh god, that's so awful. But in their classic account of hers, there is no claim that factual beliefs of groups are irreducible to anything more basic. So she's not, to my knowledge, she's not a realist in this sense that those people are. So her position is rich, and there is this sui generis normativity involved in group agency, but there is no group belief in this sense for her in these classic papers. Yeah.
If I can,
yeah.
the last remark,
Yeah.
because I think that in Gilbert, some normativity, some existence of this normative kind of plural subject is some kind of necessary condition to having institutional and group beliefs. And this is my point, that there are some, even in some factual institutional beliefs, there are some really wide scope.
Okay, yeah, so Gilbert would be joint intention plus irreducible normativity gives us group belief. Yeah. So those people would say, no, it's still not enough.
Okay.
Yeah. So it's even stronger claim. They say nothing can give us group beliefs. We just have to take it as sui generis metaphysical facts. There are group agents, group minds, and they really have beliefs. And this was considered like non-starter. Now it's becoming popular. And why it's becoming
also individual beliefs do not play any role in the establishment of the group beliefs.
They do play some role. Okay, and I will tell it about it in a second, but they are not. But group beliefs are not reducible to. So there are some
two different, but they must play a role.
They play a role.
A sort of function from individual beliefs to group beliefs.
Okay, so I will. So give me 5 minutes. I will talk just about this problem. Okay, so because we are here, because the important source of motivation for those people are contemporary views in the metaphysics of mind. So those are people who came from the metaphysics of mind, have their pet theories about minds, and apply those theories to this institutional realm and say, yeah, our theories about minds actually allow us to say that institutions are believers in the sui generis sense. So those theories are functionalism and intentional systems theory. And the interesting feature of both of these theories is that their built-in feature is that they allow non-human systems to have genuine mental states. So both functionalism and intentional system theories say yes to the question whether animals, non-human animals have minds. They say yes to the question whether artificial systems can have genuine mental states. So they are not carbon chauvinistic, to use a fashionable phrase. There is nothing essentially organic to mind. Thinking is not limited to organisms or to human beings, according to both of these pretty influential theories about philosophy of mind. So all sorts of strange systems can be minded in those views, and they take those theories and say, yeah, so AIs can be minds, so corporations in a similar way, yeah, they can have minds of their own, and so on and so forth. So this is how this idea gained traction because it has independent motivation from philosophy of mind. So you have some view about mind which has some independent claim to plausibility, and then you apply it and say, yeah, this independently plausible account of what mind is allows us to say that there are institutional beliefs. So this is how the realist position started to be, you know, at least accepted at conferences and stuff. So to give a brief overview, because most of you are not philosophers of mind, so I will try to provide a simplest possible explanation of what those views about minds are. So Dennett, who I guess you know from YouTube, the burden guy of cognitive science, has this view called intentional systems theory. And in the simplest words, according to Dennett, to have a belief is just to be interpretable from the point of view of the so-called intentional stance. So we have like three stances to interpret the world. There is a physical stance, we interpret the world as consisting of physical things. There is design stance, which we use in biology, in which we say things about functions. So the pet example is that the claim that the function of the heart is to pump blood. And this is true only from the point of view of design stance, because no one has literally designed hearts to pump blood. But if we look at organisms as if they were designed by evolution, then we are entitled to say that hearts function to pump blood. And then we have intentional stance when we say stuff like, yeah, the computer chess program intends now to use some sort of chess strategy because it's the most efficient way of interpreting the behavior of chess playing program. And Tollefsen, whom paper I sent you, gets this theory and says, yeah, it's a pretty cool theory. And it straightforwardly applies to institutions because we may apply intentional states to group actors. And from the point of view of intentional states, we actually understand their behavior better when we apply intentional stance to behavior of state actors, corporation, parliaments, and so on and so on. Or we start to see that if we think of them as acting as a single body, we understand more, we get better at predicting their behavior. And if you are like true Dennettian at heart, that should be enough to say that group agents have genuine beliefs. So this is the Tollefsen argument. Yeah, Dennett is right. Cool guy. He's right. But if we accept his theory about minds and look at those corporations, state actors, parliaments, yeah, this theory straightforwardly applies to them. And from this we get a conclusion that they really have beliefs because it's useful epistemically to apply non-reducibly understood beliefs to those actors. So that's Tollefsen's argument. And Licht and Petit don't go for Dennett, they go for functionalism. And functionalist says something like that. What are mental states? Mental states are just states that mediate between input and output. This is like Turing machine view on minds. That what is mind? Mind is the state of a Turing machine. So you have some system has input and outputs, and they have some states in between. And if those states in between fulfill some criteria of complexity, computational complexity, and so on and so forth, then we can call those states mental states. So belief has some sort of functional characteristics, like the way of mediating between cognitive input and actions, which are outputs. And if some system satisfies this description, then it has beliefs. And for that reason, we can build artificial intelligence with beliefs because we just program those systems as to make them fulfill their functional role of beliefs. So that's the yeah. Is that no? Okay. And what's important in functionalism is that functionalists say, yeah, you can make a mind of anything. There is a cool YouTube video about Danish student who built a Turing machine of Legos. And this Turing machine computed 2 + 2. Yeah, it added 2 + 2 and it came out 4. So you can make a very, very simple mind of Legos. And it's a mind. Very simple. You just have one mental state, but it is a mind. So if you can build a mind out of Lego blocks, you can build a mind out of individual people as to form sort of collective mind. And Licht and Petit says something like that, because so there are multiple substrata of minds. Many different things can realize minds. And Licht and Petit say explicitly, yeah, and many people considered as a single thing can realize mind. So then our individual actions are something that somehow is necessary for the existence of the mind, but we serve as those Lego blocks in this machine that calculates additions. Yeah, so there is no Turing machine without parts of Turing machine, but the states of the Turing machine are not states of parts of Turing machine. So yeah, so this is Licht and Petit a way of arguing that, yeah, if we go for functionalism and we understand functionalism correctly, then we should arrive at conclusion that institutions, especially large ones, are genuine believers. And both intentional systems theory and functionalism are independently plausible theories about minds. Of course, they are not the only ones, because this philosophy. So we don't have correct theory, but functionalism was, I guess, the most popular theory of mind at some point, at least. So it's not like a fringe theory, it's like very popular theory. So you take popular and established theories from philosophy of mind and then get to the conclusion that groups have beliefs, yeah?
Can you maybe elaborate a step from having a mind to having beliefs?
Okay, so having mind, it's my bad way of speaking. So you don't really have mind, you have mental states. So having a mental state in functionalism is just realizing the functional description of this particular mental state. So for each and every mental state, you can, in principle, produce something which is called the functional job description of this mental state. So like this Lego machine has arithmetical capacities, but it doesn't have emotional capacities. But simply because we didn't program it to perform the functional job description of hating Celtic Glasgow. But if we did, it would hate Celtic Glasgow if we, program this as to show it the Celtic Glasgow flag and produce the output. This is the worst team ever, down with Celtic, and so on and so forth. So yeah, so for each and every mental state, there is this functional description, and to have this particular mental state is to satisfy this job description. And for Licht and Petit, institution satisfies job description of beliefs and desires. They perhaps don't satisfy emotional job description, they don't have really emotions and so on, but they have cognitive states, because corporations need to know what the world is like, whether the stock prices are going up or down, so they have beliefs about stock prices and raw material prices and so on and so forth. Is that what?
Yeah, so I was thinking that, to me, I'm a bit squeamish about saying that they have minds. And I think I would be fair to say that they are agents.
Yeah.
But I think like this distinction between, I think it's like, which terminology does it intrinsicist and
Yeah, so this is, yeah, I miss, yeah, I should not have said it.
Okay.
I should not have said that they might. They also use this phrase, but what they really mean is that they have mental states.
Yeah.
So that's the precise way of framing the
But
phrase.
it's like performative sense, so they can perform as if they have.
Okay, so functionalism, there's no difference between having and performing.
Yeah.
Okay, and
Okay,
that's
but I mean, they still distinguish, I mean, Katikan does, so they distinguish between intrinsicist understanding of agency, which is that they really experience that.
Yeah.
For instance.
yeah. So that's not functionalist. So they,
Right.
yeah. So if you are functionalist, you reject this intrinsicist
Okay.
view. So
Completely.
yeah.
Okay.
So this is like this is a digression, but this is very important in AI debate. So people who deny that AIs can have genuine minds would be also sort of intrinsicists, because they would say, yeah, they perform those functions, but they don't really experience anything. So they are not really minded creatures. They just, emulate cognitive capacities. So, but if you are like true functionalists, you say there's no point in distinguishing perfect emulation from true mental state.
Okay, what do these true functionalists then sort of want to achieve with this? So do they also want to draw moral conclusions, for instance? Do they want to say that all?
No. Okay, so early functionalists were like doing they were doing Canberra style analysis. So they believed themselves to be providing just an analysis of the concept of mind. So like David Lewis said, okay, functionalism is just the analysis of concept. Now people say, yeah, maybe it's not a good analysis, but it's like best explanation of practice in cognitive science. So this is like a theory about what is mind based on how we understood processes of mental processes of cognitive science. So this is like scientific worldview is supposed to support functionalism. And they are like, no, we don't really care about morals. We are doing either analytic philosophy or philosophy of science, but yeah, the moral status, it might be dependent on minds, but maybe if animals don't have minds, mental states, they still have some moral status. It might be independent. This is like further question whether there is this So Davidson, for example, who's sort of functionalist, denied that animals have mental states, but he said, yeah, but there might be some animal rights. I have no problem with this. They don't think, but they can be, some. But this is very contentious. But the official stance is we are doing philosophy. We are not moral philosophers. It's theoretical philosophy. But obviously, it's hard to maintain this non-moral view all the time. Yeah.
I'd like to ask two questions. One is any author in this debate which thinks that institution has qualia in the sense of philosophy of
So there is this paper by Eric Schwitzgebel, which is called "If Functionalism is True, then United States is probably conscious." But Schwitzgebel doesn't say that functionalism is true. He said, if it is, this is a conditional, he defends this conditional statement. And he says, yeah, so we don't really, this would be strange if United States have beliefs. We don't really believe that they're conscious, phenomenally conscious. So we don't really want to believe it, but maybe functionalism is true. And then we will be forced to accept this conclusion, but he doesn't say it is true. He says that he accepted only as a conditional statement. So that's the only person I know who defended some sort of this claim.
And my second question is about the relation between external mind thesis and the discussion about institutions.
So some people explicitly connect this with external mind and say this is just another application of external mind thesis. Some of them are skeptical, but this is very detailed and technical, so please allow me to stop. Okay, and and to get back to Professor Stumiński's question, so what's the relation of this view between the individual beliefs and group beliefs? And this is the relation of supervenience without reduction. So this is the official answer. So there is this dependence.
Problem. But we want to know what's a group belief of certain matter. How can we get this knowledge? Only by asking. But are we able to ask the group? We may ask only individuals, and then even if it says that our belief is that and that, we must check whether it is authorized to express beliefs on behalf of the group.
Yeah, and that's the Ludwig's view, and we're going to it. So sorry again for saying that we will deal with this later, but
But you say that supervision, but is not grounded in, yeah?
Something like that.
So it's weaker than grounding.
It's weaker than grounding. It's weaker than grounding, definitely. So now I would want to ask you about your view on this. So Professor Stumiński says, there is this, and this is a very good point. That we
have no knowledge. I just, that's my, I would say, default views. I start with that.
So I think it's a very good point that there is this problem with epistemology of this group beliefs. How do we know? So, and the only thing we can do is to ask individuals. We cannot just go to a group and say, to institutions, say, what do you believe? You, the institution, So there's this epistemological problems. Any other ideas? What do you think about it? What's the pros and cons of these theories? If not, I can go to the ones that are in the literature, so we can then share your thoughts about it. So so there are three main pluses of these theories. First, it does the job. It provides truth makers for attributions of beliefs to groups. And if you are a true metaphysician, you are happy because you got what you wanted. The second one is it's one of the few theories that really solves the discursive dilemma, because it says there is this supervenience without reduction, so we can say that there is a difference between what the group believes and what the individual members believe. And Tollefsen, which was the basis for our class, says, but the most important advantage of realism is that it can potentially improve our understanding of the world. So if we take institutions to be genuine agents having reasons of their own, we can understand more of why stuff happens in the real world. So there's like stock examples of this in the literature. So there was this rivalry between Dutch East India Company and British East India Company. And they had this really intense competition, and it spanned for 100 or 250 years, 200 years. And there were hundreds of people involved in both of these corporations. And it wasn't really that one Dutch guy or a couple of Dutch guys rival. So the claim is that we understand more about the history of the colonization of India by seeing East India Company as a singular actor, by just looking at the intentions of the people which did this. So this is the Tollefsen argument. She says, we will understand more about the world if we adopt this stance to see East India Company as a singular actor having a singular aim, which is to increase the control over the trade with India and so on. It's the aim of the actor which is the East India Company, not of the individual. So that's, I guess, the strongest reason they have that it's predictably successful to be realist. Yeah.
Well, I still wouldn't say that the East Indian Company has beliefs about something.
Yeah, so that's true. That this is some sort of a quick transition from saying, it is predictably good to to attribute beliefs to East India Company.
Well, you could say aims, maybe, or functions.
But in order to have aims, you need to have some that was the part we did yesterday. That in order to have aims, you also have to have some sort of representation of the world, because you have to, represent the world as being such and such in order to formulate the aim and the way of achieving this aim. So you cannot really have aims in strong sense unless you are capable of representing the reality. So that's the sort of argument. It might be a bad argument, but this how they go from aims to beliefs, that you cannot really have aim unless you're capable of representing reality.
Well, maybe it could mean, for example, that operating within that company requires a certain metaphysics or disposition.
Yeah.
But doesn't mean that the company as such has beliefs. So.
Yeah. Okay. So.
Yeah, I'm just thinking that this could, like, if we want to say punish corporations, like, and this could help us explain why it's meaningful or something.
Yeah. So this is another argument, that it can increase the corporate responsibility. So this is practical aim. So if we want to, have more stringent laws on corporate responsibility, then we might want to provisionally accept this sort of thinking in order to just sort of justify this more stringent law corporate responsibility.
I can add some, because I have some problem with this argument, relation between responsibility and institutional beliefs, because I think there is no necessary relation between those two things, and social responsibility can be social constructed. So we can construct responsibility which will be not based or spreading on our, for example, having beliefs or something like that.
Okay, so and that's, I guess, is the source of the disagreement. One of the main sources of disagreement in realists and all the other sane people, because realists say no, we cannot do this. So Tollefson explicitly says, I don't believe you can have genuine responsibility which is merely socially constructed or something. If it's responsible, it must be a real agent. But this is like some sort of dogmatic pronouncement of her part, and that's maybe the weakness of the theory.
We have a lot of historical examples of responsibility without beliefs, intention, for example, some kind of criminal responsibility of things. So
unwise and so on.
And so on.
So I guess this argument of Tollefson is really sort of dogmatic on her part, and that's why we might not be very convinced. I'm not a realist. I'm just presenting her view. I don't think it's a very good view, but I just wanted to persuade you that it's not just crazy. It has some reasons that might be defeated, but it did come from some certain considerations. So I don't believe in realism, but that's not my view, definitely. Yeah, Lisa?
Yeah, just to sort of, as a counterpoint. So, I mean, yesterday I was in my second lecture, I was talking about how, of course, it's possible for us to sort of, the legislature to enact a statute that says that reverse are legal persons or process of legal persons and so on. But of course, we are still, is that really meaningful? Are we really treating those entities as legal persons? And similarly, we could ask, okay, so we were, punishing rocks. If a rock is something bad, we can throw it away or something. Are we really punishing the rock in any way, or is it rather based on some mistaken assumptions, for instance? So that would be a counter argument.
Yes, but the kind of responsibility which is imposed on the rocks and, for example, institution. It's a hard question, but I think that there are a lot of examples when the punishment is the same kind in the situation where there are some really agent and the agent without intention to simply gain. So it's maybe some kind of counter example to your test, but I don't have really good historical example now.
Okay, so but maybe
Putting animals on trial.
yeah, putting animals on trial. Yeah. So Ira, and I would be happy to move to another slide. So do you want to say something?
So it strikes me that the view is more plausible if you have a pretty thin,
Yeah, that's
a
true.
pretty thin account of what beliefs are
Yeah,
for
and that's
people.
yeah.
And, you could have a sort of view where they're not really picking out unique brain states, they're things that we attribute to people because they make sense of their behavior and they're really useful for prediction, but in fact, everyone's belief might look different on a physical level, and there might be nothing you could say that unifies them, except that they play the same function.
Yeah, so great,
So
because
if that's the background view, then the whole thing starts to look plausible.
yeah, so that's the point that is often made in the papers. So thanks for letting me go to the next slide, because that's one of the main counter arguments, that you can have such a notion of belief that makes the view plausible, but it's really a thin notion of belief. It's really unsubstantial. And if you make the notion of belief really unsubstantial, then yeah, corporations have belief, thermostats have beliefs, but it's really like no big deal, because we only think that belief is something, special and so on and so forth, but it's just an uninteresting claim which follows from the definition of belief in this very thin sense. Yeah, so that's one of the major objections to this theory. So another objection is this Lewisian incredulous stare. I don't know if you ever heard about Lewis' modal realism, when he said that there are actual other possible worlds. And Lewis said in one of his papers, I presented this theory and no one had really any substantial objections. They just stared at me like, but this is like a good argument. So if you're starting to have a theory and the only thing people in the audience do is just like, maybe your theory is not that good, So I think there is the incredible stare argument is not a bad argument. So it means that, especially if you are analytic philosopher and your self-professed job is to analyze concepts, and then you end up saying something completely unacceptable for most people, it might be a reason to think you did a bad job in the analysis. So this is first.
Lewis didn't seem to think so.
Sorry?
David Lewis didn't seem to think so.
No, he didn't. No, so that's, and Russell had this quip that in philosophy you start people so trivial that no one thinks it's important and end up saying things so crazy that no one believes you. So this is, yeah, and Russell was crazy. If you ever read what logical atomism is, this is like the craziest metaphysics ever, So yeah. So the first argument is just no, it cannot possibly be true. And I think there is some grain of importance to this argument. The other argument, which is, I guess Visa was pointing at some point to this argument, which has been like put in print in elaborate form by Omegar and Salis, the two guys, and they had recently a paper in Synthesis which really elaborated on this line of thought, was this that yeah, but we really don't believe that institutions have phenomenal consciousness, and there is no reason to think that they have. But in order to say that they are minds and beliefs and so on, we would have to think that they are phenomenally conscious. And this is one of the major problems in philosophy of mind. Can you really disconnect cognition from consciousness? And functionalism are the people who says, yes, we can. You can have cognition without consciousness. But there are many people who think this is not really feasible. Yeah?
I believe there is a way around this without accepting the functionalist claim, which would be to accept the higher order theory of consciousness, that is, on which for a mental state to be Right, for a mental state to be conscious, it has to be a subject of a higher level mental state. So for instance, if America has racist beliefs, and then
Yeah.
like,
Yeah.
America
but that-
realizes that it has racist
Okay, so
beliefs, then we can say that America has a conscious belief that.
Yeah. So that's the Schwittgeber way of putting this conditional claim there. So if you buy into this analysis of consciousness in terms of higher level thought and so on, but this is a functionalist view still. This is functionalism because what's important is that you don't really rely on first person subjective qualia in defining consciousness. And people who think that you need to rely on qualia in this very strong sense of qualia would say no. United States don't have qualia. It might have higher order thoughts and in this sense be conscious, but really it doesn't have qualia. So yeah, so then it depends on the definition of consciousness. Yeah, whether this argument is really true, but usually this argument is produced with a strong notion of consciousness in mind, and then it follows that, yeah, if you believe that you cannot decouple cognition from consciousness in the strong sense, then yeah, there is no cognition of one individual entities.
I wonder whether the distinction between, from the philosophical mind, distinction between conscious and unconscious beliefs are applicable.
Okay, yeah, yes. Okay, so beliefs, I would say something really strange, but I'm now employed as a philosopher of mind, so allow me. Beliefs are by definition non-conscious.
Okay.
Okay, so belief is usually distinguished by people writing about belief from thought. Thought is conscious. It's what you think right now. That are your thoughts. And Lish and Petit don't claim that corporations have thoughts. Thoughts are something you have in mind here and now. Beliefs are called those dispositional states. So if I press you to tell me that, do you think Dublin is north of Madrid? Would you say yes?
No.
Think about it. Try to remember your high school geography and tell me, is Dublin north of Madrid?
Yes.
Okay, so you believe that Dublin is north of Madrid, but probably you have never thought about it. So beliefs are those states you have somehow in the back. You know, there's something which guides your cognition, but you don't really have to realize that you have the belief in order to have it. So in this, so belief and thought are two different things, and the claim about institutional belief is the claim about belief, not about thoughts. Thoughts are something you have in your conscious mind here and now. Belief is something which is the cognitive, you know, equipment of your mind, which guides your action and cognition and so on and so forth. And you don't really need to think about all your beliefs. It's probably impossible for us humans to, you know, brought all our beliefs to conscious attention and so on and so forth. Yeah.
But must beliefs not be in some way be able to be brought to the front?
Okay, yeah, and that's the debate. That's the debate in like the last 10 years. So there are people like Gavin Strawson and so on who say, yeah, so you can have unconscious belief, but all beliefs must be potentially conscious in order to be real. Sortish, yeah, accessible. And some people say, no. So that's, but this is another chapter in the debate about functionalism. So functionalists say, no, there's no need for beliefs to be accessible. They are just to be there. But people who are like phenomenologically inclined would say, yeah, no, you have beliefs need to be accessible. So those people would say, no, institutions do not have beliefs because they cannot bring them to their attention because they don't have attention, like phenomenologically speaking. So yeah, so if you have any sort of preponderance towards phenomenological accounts of human mind, you would probably never believe. And maybe that's good. Maybe that's good, but you know, you have to reject any sort of phenomenological account in order to have this skill. So yeah, we've gone through. Ira did us And he said, yeah, this is maybe belief, but very weakly defined, and this weak definition is trivial, uninteresting. Yeah, you won, but but you won by definition. That's uninteresting with nothing. Yeah, yeah. So that's the common counter argument of realism. An interesting counter argument was provided by Bryce Hibner, who wrote a big, nice book called Macrocognition. And he says, yeah, it is in principle possible for a pan-individual entity to have cognitive states. But to have cognitive states, you have to be extremely complex. And most of the corporation court parliaments are not very functionally complex. they some sort of complex, but not that complex as our brain. Our brain has like billions of neurons and so on and so forth. And this is not that corporation doesn't have the sort of dysfunctional complexity. So there's nothing metaphysical in the difference between our brains and corporate beliefs. It's just the difference between the huge complexity of our brains and the relative little complexity of corporations. So I think it's a very nice argument. And the last argument, which relates to visa stock, is that many legal theorists and social philosophers think that, yeah, corporations are purely legal entities. They are just created by fiat. So, and they're abstract objects in this sense, several abstract objects. And abstract objects don't really think. So there's this simple counter-argument that if you think that institutions are abstract objects, they cannot be really subject to any fault. So yeah, so if, I know you don't believe that corporations are abstract objects, but people who do would definitely not agree with realism. Yeah, so that's the counter-argument. And I think we will stop with Ludwig's view, but this was the other paper I sent you to read, but so maybe let's do it and we'll finish. So Ludwig, and he wrote a couple of papers and then a book about this in the last like 5 years or 6. And he has, this is not maybe an established theory, but maybe it's one of the most interesting new ideas on the market on this issue. So Ludwig says, no, we don't want realists. We want to return to reduction, but the reduction needs to be very complex one in order to work. So the actual book is like 600 pages long, and it's only about reducing it. So we need to work hard to do the reduction, but it is in principle possible. And this is neither summative account nor joint agency account. It's not believing in any Gilbert, Bratman, anything like that. But he says the starting point of this reduction must be the admission that there is this stuff called status roles, which are any institutional group involves status role. Status role is the fact that I'm an academic teacher, and as an academic teacher, I can grade papers. This is my status role, which means I'm bestowed with some special status, which allows me to do some valid socially or legally things. And that's the central element of any institutional group, that people who enter those groups enter by having status roles, not as just people, but people with status roles. So various persons play various roles, they act because they have those roles, like members of the boards, reporting judges, and so on and so forth. But this is just the first step of his view. So I tried to summarize this 400 or 600 pages for you on one slide, and the summary goes like this. So what happens when corporation believes, and the book is specifically about corporations, there's nothing on court or parliaments, only corporations. So there is this fact that there is some corporate official who is acting not as individual person, but in his status role. For example, as a spokesperson, CEO, or something. So there is this act of individual acting in the status role. And this is one part of the view. So you have to have someone who's doing something as a part of its status role. Yeah, but this official person is not acting on her or his behalf. He's acting, the people who are acting are shareholders. And officials are proxy agent, or what's the legal term for this? They have the power of attorney, limited, very limited power of attorney for the shareholders. So this is what happens. So you have various people, some people give some limited power of attorney to other people who are the officials, and the official acting in the role make pronouncement. And then what happens is that it is true that Google believes, because the shareholders of Google gave the board a limited power of attorney to act on their behalf. The CEO gave then delegated some of this power to his spokesperson or the PR department of Google, and the PR department of Google make this announcement as. So in this way, no one of these people must believe that open source is good for everyone. Shareholders might not know what open source is, they don't care. The CEO might think open source is horrible, but this is really smart PR move. The PR team might be just putting stuff on Facebook, and you know, we have to say, the post call says, yeah, you need to say open source is good. Yeah, cool. We will say open source is good. So there is no real need for anyone in this chain to believe that P. But the effect of this complex procedure is the fact that Google believes, but this is not a sui generis fact. This fact is reducible to this very, very complex set of legal institutional facts.
Yeah. Can there be sincerity conditions then for these pictures?
Yeah, no. There can be felicity conditions for like official pronouncements. So yeah, if I say I'm now on behalf of the Polish Supreme Court declare, you know, that's not felicitous speech act. Mm-hmm. So, but they don't. Yeah. So because what is important is you not act as a person. You act in your role, and that's a very different way of acting than acting as yourself.
I'm really surprised because I think that's just standard legal views. Any lawyers of the last 2000 years would say so. So I don't see here any, you know, discovery by Ludwig, you know. That's slightly different terminology because there's a general concept of representation. Yeah. And there are different sorts of representation. Could power of attorney, proxy.
So
representation can by picture of law, by picture of declaration of will, and so on. So very many details. But that is, you know, that's, I think the students the first year when they learn about corporations, they learn just that.
Okay, so Ludwig is not claiming that he's discovered this. He just quotes lots of lawyers and legal, you know.
So of course, maybe, you know, in this university teaching first year, they do speak about constitutive social rules, status function, and so on. As a matter of fact, it's just that.
Okay, so Ludwig, what Ludwig claims he is doing, he's saying, yeah, so I'm just translating. So my theory is just translating from this legal
into sales language.
And then I think his view is important because when you try to explain Kelsen to me yesterday, we couldn't really decide whether this is a reduction, metaphor view, and so on and so forth. So what Ludwig is doing is just providing the, you know, strict metaphysical explanation of this lawyer's intuition into the philosophical language. So yes, he says that's the view of like courts. When courts rule on corporate agency, that's what they say, but they frame it in a like non-philosophically precise way and so on. So my view is just that we should, as philosophers, interpret this basic legal account in this sense, and in this sense we can understand what is happening. But he defers to lawyers all of the time. So says, yeah, so this is like Supreme Court view in the States about corporate responsibility. Yeah, Ira, maybe first.
So, because I'm a lawyer, and this was in fact the very first thing I did in my corporate law course, the law student, it's called agency law in common law system. And sort of the question is which acts of people associated with the corporate entity are attributed to the corporate business entity. It's actually not just a corporate issue. The same issue arises for other entities. But the thing that concerns me here a little bit is there's a very specific job here, which is to figure out which acts are attributable to the corporate entity. But in some sense, this is a very thin theory. We're just trying to figure out when A does B, is that A acting in a personal capacity or acting in a corporate capacity? But it doesn't seem to me that there's any necessary constraint here that the corporation has to have internally consistent mental states or quasi-mental states or something. If the corporation has a whole bunch of random sort of beliefs and desires that don't have any internal consistency or make sense, that the right people do or say things were authorized by the corporation, that's a sad commentary on sort of how the business is run. But, when I'm thinking about this as law, there's no problem here. But if I'm thinking about this philosophically, it looks like this isn't really a theory.
Okay, so
another thing is that what the members of the corporation, shareholders, believe does not play any role here. So the act of the president is valid, irrespective of that what the shareholders believe. And that is not, in group age or group belief. So we are talking about the belief supervene of individual beliefs. Here, there's no such supervene.
There is some supervenience, but not on beliefs, but on actions. So Ludwig says the corporate belief supervenes on actions of the individual. So you bought a share of Google, and by there you implicitly gave the power of attorney. So there is supervenience, but this is like ultra complex supervenience. So Visa, and I want to say this before I finish.
So maybe build some Ira's comments, but also my earlier question about sincerity conditions. So I'm just wondering, so if Google then says on its website that Google believes in open source, can we then say that that's false, or that Google is lying?
So maybe there's only felicity conditions for this. Maybe there's no truth conditions for this. Okay. So that might be a counter argument to Ludwig, that there is no real truth maker to it. It's only like a speech act.
I don't think that, at least in legal context, the truth plays any role, because usually what representatives of a corporation do, they perform certain legal actions. They buy, they sell, they dissolve the company, and so on, and they don't make statements which could be true or false. So it's very, sometimes such a declaration of Google does not have any legal import. That somebody, Google says that, that's what was the example, that open access is important. Well, it is, or it's not, it does not have any legal consequences for Google.
So it's important. It is important because for Ludwig, Searle is very important. And he's really relying on this notion of declaration. So what happens is that the official make declaration, and this sort of, constitutes the fact that if they're entitled and all these complex social rules are, valid and fulfilled, then this announcement of the appropriate official constitutes the fact that the institution believes it, if not reporting of an individual previously independently existing fact. So I will allow one question, move to the slide, because we really have a coffee break, sorry. Yeah.
I would like to add some remark to this question by Peter, because in my opinion, according to Ludwig, it is possible to say that something is literally true or not, because he based his account on the Davidson philosophy of action, and he thinks that there are so talking about institutions is some kind of façon de parler, way of speaking, and this is the problem which is on slide. So
yeah, so what is really strange about Ludwig's view is that he first produces this account as a reduction, but in the last section of the paper, he goes back to metaphor view and says, so yeah, we have this complex reduction to this complex set of social facts and status roles and announcement in the capacity of being a proxy agent for the shareholders, you know, stuff, this standard legal stuff. And then he says, yeah, so in a way we can say that this reduction really amounts to saying that the fictional, the belief of corporation is sort of legal fiction. And that's what I find really disturbing about view. But this is precisely the same thing I found disturbing about Kelsen's view, which Professor Studnicki. So on the one hand, it sort of sounded like a reduction, and on the other, it sort of sounded like a fictional approach. So as a general philosopher, I cannot force myself to believe that you can be reductionist and fictionalist at the very same time. It's like you, on one hand, say that some stuff does not exist, and by the way, it's reducible to this more basic one. So, so no, you cannot really be fictionalist and reductionist at the same time, and that is my own problem with Ludwig. So whether yeah, so let's give him credit where he's due. So this is, I guess, the best reductive account we have now. That's my personal appraisal of the situation. Because this is a reductive account, and it is capable of thinking of the most problems we face with other reductive accounts. So there is no strange supermind theory, but there is no discursive dilemma. Because you don't really want to just get the group belief from the individual beliefs. So what is the decision of the court, whether P and Q, is what is the official pronouncement of the judge who is, you know, authorized by the court to make the, yeah. So you can easily get around discursive dilemma in this way, because you don't summarize individual beliefs to get the belief of the institution. So you solve lots of problems. So this is really good account. It's consistent with the opinion of the lawyer. So he really did his homework. He read the law.
It also means that lawyers are more clever than people usually think.
Yeah, so that's
the theory, irrespective of not relying on philosophy.
Yeah. Okay, so and my work, and I have only two worries that we will finish, and we will not go to the last theory. Yeah, so I think that there are two main problems, and I don't know if there have been already put in the literature. If not, I can write a paper and some more points in our evaluation system. Yeah, so I think there can be two counter arguments. I would love to hear your view on those counter arguments that I thought up against Ludwig. First, this is what I said before. I think there is this general metaphysical problem that you can be you either go for metaphor account or either reduction. This is really inconsistent to say both. So maybe it's a good company inconsistency. Maybe Kelsen or the other legal theorists are also guilty of this inconsistency, that they on one hand write as if corporate agency is just proxy agency, and on the other hand they write that this is a legal fiction. But yeah, legal theorists do not have to be held to the same standard as the prominent metaphysician of Ludwig's statue should be held. You know, you are not a lawyer, you are a metaphysician. Do the proper metaphysics. Say what is your metaphysics, and you are either one or the other. And I think this is not, you really cannot be both. But maybe I'm wrong, maybe you can. So I'm really happy to hear your views about it. Tomasz?
Clarification question.
Yeah.
So, do you think the fictional component is any way essential to what Ludwig says, or suppose he accepts your argument and says, well, let's get to know the fiction stuff.
Yeah, so maybe that's the easiest part. Maybe you just can, you know, delete the last part of the paper and say, yeah, I didn't really have to do it. But in a way, I think it's important to him because he said something like that. Yeah, but we have to do something with the sentences which look like there were. Yeah, so I'm not really sure whether he can get rid of it. Maybe it's just like my point would be fairly minor. You don't need the fictional, but maybe it's like then his account would be somehow impoverished. But yeah, that's a very good point. Whether it's an essential part of this theory that he has this fictionalist element in it.
Sorry, what sentence? I didn't get it. What sentences?
That look as if they attributed non-reducible beliefs to pan-individual entities. He has some phrases like this in the last part of the papers. Yeah, after we do all this reduction, we are still left with those sentences. And then to deal with those sentences, we have to apply the fictionalist approach. So I don't know. that like really bugs me, you know.
If I can add something, I do not think that Ludwig is representative of metaphor view, because this is based on Davidson theory, and in the Davidson theory, actions are in ultimate sense physical movements. There's a lot of way of speaking about this action and through the consequences of this action. There is no, I think, fictionalism, but any metaphor. There is only some way of speaking, which true maker is ultimately in physical reality.
Okay,
I think this point which Ludwig tried to do, and if I can, okay.
So I think he has some like explicit pronouncements to the opposite effect. Okay, that he really wrote that, yeah, so there is this Davidsonian part, which takes the most part of his theory, but on top of this Davidsonian account, there is this hint of going back to metaphor view. So it's not purely Davidsonian.
But there's also based on Searle's account of social reality.
Yeah.
And for example, Searle's made distinction between the dependent and my dependent and my independent reality, and try to articulate the explanation of that social sciences have literal truth in set of theory. And I think that Ludwig think that talking about institutions can be literally true.
Yeah.
And these remarks which Ludwig makes about fictions and are only incidental. In some point, Ludwig said that it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. Even there may be some functionalist minds of institution in functionalist sense. So I'm not sure that this is necessary relation between fictionalism metaphor view with Ludwig's view, but I totally agree with you that this is really hard to interpret what Ludwig said.
Okay, yeah. And yeah, the other argument was also raised, and I'm also interested, but maybe during the coffee break. Is there any problem with saying that
that is the most obvious legal platitude? So each lawyer knows that is true.
Of course it is true. Of course it is true, but if you want to do the analytical reduction of corporate agency to proxy agency, is it really good metaphysical reduction? Maybe it's just like me not being a lawyer have reservations, but but proxy agency in which someone acts as your proxy and do stuff directly against your intentions. Is this a good example of proxy agency?
It depends on what kind of authorization you give, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, so you would think that it's very special kind of authorization.
That's the deal when you buy shares.
Yeah.
Okay.
Everyone who looks into the matter knows this.
You are aware from the very beginning that unless you have a controlling majority,
No. Okay, so yeah, but my point is different. I know how share works very badly, but I know that if you buy shares, you own company, but in a very thin sense, and you just the only thing you get is returns, but you don't end voting if you have on the board. But that's what is the share. That's how share works. But can you really say that you can somehow derive intentions of corporations from intentions of shareholders if you have this sort of legal institution? That's my problem, because that's how share works. But then Ludwig says, yeah, but what he says at some point is that who is the genuine actor when Google acts? And he says, at the end of the day, it's shareholders. And that's my problem with you. Yeah.
Abstract entity.
Yeah. Sorry.
It's an abstract entity of some sort. The shareholders
so they're not
role, but they're not
Okay.
controlling.
Yeah. So, but he wants to have some actual people at the end, and this cannot be officials, because officials are just attorneys, and so they're not the ultimate sources of the acts. So he needs the ultimate source of the agent, and he says, yes, at the end of the day, it's shareholders to act. And this, what I find bizarre, if you know how share works, and he knows how shares works better than I do, then it somehow strikes me as implausible to say that, yeah, when Google says that open source is good for everyone, this is some sort of very strange act done by shareholders. And I'm like,
That's more general. You are representative of your children. You act as agent for your children, and you act very frequently against them. They don't want to go to school, but you send them to school. So that's exactly the same.
yeah, but the problem, yeah, but the problem is not how legal institution works. Yeah, but can you really combine how legal institution work with redaction? Yeah, that's the problem. It's not the problem that the power of attorney works in this way that you can do stuff against the will of the person with the power of attorney, but then can you really do the redaction if you accept this view?
To my mind, that's not a reduction.
Okay, yeah, so then you are not actually accepting Ludwig's view. It's very similar to what lawyer says, but at the end of the day, he gives this very strong metaphysical reading, which you might be reluctant to accept. Yeah.
I don't know, I'm thinking like Maciek said something yesterday that Google was sued because it was some problem with Street View, and Google pointed out one person, the person, and that was fault of the glitch. And if, according to this view, it's possible that Google can point out the specific person, and in this court, the specific person is sued for this glitch, or I'm not sure of it wouldn't be possible because this specific person was working on behalf of the company.
But I think this case is a real red herring, sorry, Maciek, because this is a case when a corporate entity just diverts responsibility for itself. But if Google is sued, and it's Google who has to pay compensation to people. So on Ludwig's view, who is really punished? And Ludwig would say shareholders were punished because they lost. It's them who lost money. So it's not CEO, it's not employees that were punished. At the end of the day, who is the subject of responsibility is the shareholders, because they get the burden of the of the punishment because they lose money if the people loses court case and has to pay a compensation. So this might be some sort of support of the shareholders. Fisa?
Yeah, just a very small thing, but I think like in law you can have two different kinds of representations. One is more like representation for representing the will of someone, and then there's representation of interests.
Yeah.
And it seems to me that for the shareholders, it's more about representation of interests. And in theory, that's fine, but then of course, if Ludwig's claiming that it's the shareholders who are actually acting, then that does sound a bit strange.
Yeah.
Because of course, you can represent your child, and in that case, probably representing the child's interests.
Yeah.
But it's funny to say that the child would be acting.
Yeah. That's my problem with the story. It's really nice and really gets rid of all sorts of the problems that very primitive theories have. But if he said that actually shareholders acting, and if state actors, it's maybe us. So if the government of Finland declare I don't know, war of trade with Sweden, so about fishing rights in the Bay of Botany, it would be you and all of other Finns really acting, and you can have some reservations about this reduction. But if you have no reduction, then you go to metaphor view and back with the problem. So I think it's nice theory, it's a very complex theory, but it really runs into some problems finally.
And since I take your interest into consideration, like we can break now because coffee break is waiting. We still get some Krzysztof then, and we are back here in 20 minutes.
Thanks.
Thank you.